She called the police because I had too many chairs on my porch. That's how it started. I came home from Costco with a set of collapsible patio chairs for an upcoming barbecue, and within 20 minutes, Officer Garvey was knocking on my front door with a sheepish look and a clipboard. I thought he was joking at first, some kind of weird HOA-themed prank, but no, he was holding a printed complaint about an unauthorized outdoor furniture assembly resembling a party setup. The best part? It was signed by Karen Middleton, president of the Willow Creek HOA, three-time neighborhood watch coordinator, and self-appointed moral guardian of our cul-de-sac. She stood behind him, arms crossed, lips pursed, wearing a blouse that looked like it had been ironed by angels and a name tag she definitely printed herself. "Mr. Keene," she said, voice tight as violin string, "you know there are limits to the number of guests you can entertain on HOA property without prior approval." I blinked. "Karen, they're chairs. Not guests. They don't eat. They don't drink. They don't gossip about your hair." Garvey turned to cough, but I saw the smile he tried to hide. That was Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, I had a certified letter from the HOA informing me that my upcoming party, a birthday celebration for my godson, was now subject to official review. The letter demanded I submit a full guest list, food inventory, noise forecast, and parking logistics plan no later than Friday. It was printed in Comic Sans, which would have been funnier if it weren't stapled to a $175 provisional event permit invoice. Apparently, they were now charging neighbors for excessive celebratory intent. I thought it was a joke until I called the HOA office and got transferred to Karen herself, who told me in an eerily calm tone that unregulated parties can invite elements that destabilize community standards. I told her I wasn't inviting a biker gang, just some family and a few kids. She told me bikers start somewhere, usually with birthday cake. I could have canceled the party. That was the safer play. But there's a switch in my brain that flips whenever someone weaponizes bureaucracy just to feel powerful. And Karen had flipped it with both hands. I decided the party would go ahead, and not just go ahead, it would be immaculate. Every permit filed, every box ticked, every banner regulation compliant down to the millimeter. I even contacted the county to verify noise ordinance thresholds and had my speakers professionally calibrated. The bounce house guy laughed when I asked for a structural integrity report, but he gave me one anyway. I wanted this party to be a legal fortress, because I knew Karen wouldn't stop at chairs. Sure enough, she didn't. The day before the party, I saw her walking around my front yard with a clipboard and a tiny tape measure, squinting at the grass like it had personally insulted her. That evening, I received another letter, this one citing my party as a potential fire hazard due to balloon proximity to power lines. I had 3 helium balloons tied to a picnic table. The nearest power line was across the street. Still, she included a screenshot from Google Maps and drew a red line between the balloons and the pole like she was connecting criminal dots. I filed a counter-complaint. She escalated to an emergency board meeting. I went to it, wearing a suit and carrying a binder of evidence. She tried to bar me from speaking. I read directly from the HOA bylaws. I quoted clause numbers. I cited precedents. She twitched. The party, to my great disappointment and her visible horror, went off perfectly. Kids laughed, adults mingled, the weather behaved, and the sheriff drove by twice just to say hi, because he heard there might be cake and conflict. He got both. The only incident came when Karen showed up around dusk with a yellow highlighter and tried to physically count guests through my backyard fence slat. When someone offered her a cupcake, she said it was a bribe in plain sight, and left muttering into her phone. By Monday, I had a new letter from the HOA. This one was labeled Level 3 Community Order Violation, Suspicious Guest Congregation. It accused me of knowingly hosting unauthorized individuals of interest and demanded, again, my full guest list. But this time, the language was different, heavier, more aggressive. It referenced national security. That's when I realized what she was doing. Karen knew my brother-in-law worked for the government. He'd come in from D.C. for the party, and yes, he brought a few colleagues. Some of them were quiet, well-dressed, didn't say much. Karen saw that as suspicious. I knew she had always fantasized about being part of some neighborhood intelligence network. The idea of spies lurking in birthday parties probably thrilled her in ways her husband hadn't in years. But accusing my guests of being potential foreign agents crossed a line I wasn't going to let her erase. So I made a call. It wasn't to a lawyer. It wasn't to the HOA Oversight Board. I called a guy named Ray, one of my brother-in-law's friends. I didn't know exactly what Ray did, but I knew he had an office with no windows and a badge that made TSA agents stand up straighter. I explained the situation. Ray listened without interrupting. Then he asked me to send over a copy of Karen's letter. I did. He whistled. She cited federal security codes in a neighborhood memo, he said. That's ballsy. And illegal. I asked him what would happen if I forwarded the whole thing to the right people. Well, he said, it depends. But I'd love to find out. So I printed Karen's letter. I highlighted every part that referenced security threats, concerning affiliations, and unvetted foreign nationals. Then I scanned it, packaged it with photos from the party, and sent it all in an official-looking envelope to a regional FBI office. I wrote a short cover letter explaining that I had been accused of hosting intelligence threats in my backyard and that I wanted to clear my name before the accusations went further. I kept it calm, factual, and perfectly deadpan. Then I waited. It took 9 days. On the 10th, I saw a black SUV cruise slowly past my house. 2 hours later, I got a call from a blocked number. A man introduced himself only as Agent Miller. He asked if I was the one who submitted the HOA complaint. I said I was. He thanked me and hung up. That evening, Karen didn't come outside. Her porch light, usually on from dusk until midnight, stayed dark. By Thursday, word had spread that she'd taken an emergency vacation. The HOA office was closed for restructuring. And just when I thought it might be over, I got a call from Ray. He was laughing. You didn't just get her investigated, he said. She triggered a multi-agency audit by referencing classified protocols in a civilian document. The phrase foreign infiltration of residential zones raised some alarms. I asked him what would happen. Nothing criminal, probably. But embarrassing? Career-ending? Oh yeah. She's officially on a list now. Not the one she wanted. I stood on my porch, sipping coffee, watching the wind rustle my perfect, regulation-compliant chairs. Karen's house was dark again. And my mailbox held another envelope, this one with a new HOA return address. I opened it slowly and smiled. A special meeting had been called to vote on new leadership. Nominations were open. I had a feeling mine would be the only name on the ballot. The new HOA board meeting was held in the same place as always, the community rec center that smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and broken dreams. Only this time, the folding chairs were arranged in perfect lines instead of a passive-aggressive horseshoe, and Karen's nameplate had been quietly removed from the sign-in table. The interim board president, a retired dentist named Harold, tried to pretend he didn't know what had happened to her. But judging by the way he kept adjusting his collar and avoiding eye contact whenever someone mentioned national security, I was pretty sure he'd seen the envelope with the FBI letterhead too. There was only one nomination for board president. Mine. I didn't campaign. I didn't even show up until 10 minutes before the vote, sipping an iced coffee and wearing sunglasses like I'd just wandered in off a movie set. When the floor opened for discussion, someone asked if I had any prior leadership experience. I said, just enough not to declare war over patio furniture. That got me a round of applause. The vote was unanimous. The only abstention came from Karen's best friend, Tina, who scowled at me like I'd just keyed her Range Rover. I smiled back. I was now, officially, in charge of the very institution Karen had used to terrorize the block for 5 years straight. Which meant it was time to get to work. My first act as president was to implement what I called the sanity clause. It was a simple rule. Any complaint submitted to the HOA had to be accompanied by photographic evidence and 2 signatures from non-family neighbors who agreed the issue was worth addressing. That alone cut complaints down by 80%. Suddenly, the people who used to file reports about kids drawing chalk on sidewalks or dogs barking at mail trucks had to look their neighbors in the eye and explain why anyone should care. Most didn't bother. The air got lighter. People smiled more. I actually saw Harold whistle while gardening. The whole neighborhood seemed to exhale at once. But not everyone was happy. 3 weeks after I took office, Karen returned. She didn't announce it, of course. Just slinked back into her colonial-style house like a scandalized televangelist crawling back to her flock. Her blinds stayed closed, her lawn looked like it was holding its breath, and no one saw her in daylight for at least a week. But the energy shifted. One morning, I found a note on my windshield written in aggressively neat cursive. Power can corrupt. Oversight is essential. No signature. Just a lipstick stain in a shade called moral superiority. I knew it was her. And I knew she wasn't finished. Then came the emails. At first, they were anonymous. Tips submitted to the HOA inbox claiming that I was abusing my position by allowing parties without permits, bending the rules for friends, or giving preferential treatment to known subversives. Yes, really. Someone had brought back the spy angle. I traced the IP addresses to a local VPN provider. Amateur. So I sent out a community-wide newsletter. A cheerful, friendly note about how anonymous accusations weren't permitted under the new bylaws, and all future complaints must come with names attached. I ended it with a quote from the Constitution, just to twist the knife. 2 hours later, Tina called an emergency neighborhood forum. She said it was about restoring balance. Now, I don't mind a little drama. But Tina's event was more like a passive-aggressive TED Talk. She'd printed flyers, set up a podium, even brought cookies shaped like gavels. She began her speech by talking about moral decay and structural favoritism, and how the HOA shouldn't be run like a celebrity yacht club. I raised my hand and asked what that meant. She snapped, "You know what it means." I said I didn't, but I was intrigued. The meeting spiraled after that. Someone brought up the fact that Tina once tried to fine a neighbor for using wind chimes. Another asked if anyone had actually seen Karen since her return. Tina refused to answer. Someone else asked if the cookies were gluten-free. They were not. The crowd turned. The forum fizzled. I went home and poured myself a drink. That should have been the end of it. But the thing about people like Karen and Tina is they don't lose. Not quietly. Not ever. They regroup. They scheme. And then they launch something that feels so small at first you almost miss it. A noise complaint. Just one, filed by a concerned neighbor, about strange vibrations and rhythmic interference coming from my house late at night. At first, I laughed. Then I realized something. This was a setup. I checked my front yard. Sure enough, a small object was attached to my mailbox post. A black plastic square with a blinking red light, cheap but functional. A wireless vibration sensor. Someone was trying to make it look like I was throwing secret rave. I took photos, bagged the device, and went next door to see my neighbor Eddie, a former telecom engineer who now spent his retirement building custom drones for fun. He took one look at the sensor and laughed so hard he nearly dropped his screwdriver. "This is a baby monitor in disguise," he said. "They probably bought it on Wish." I asked if he could find out where it was transmitting. He grinned and disappeared into his garage. By nightfall, Eddie had it mapped. The sensor was sending signals to a receiver 3 houses down, Tina's house. I knocked on her door the next morning, holding the device in one hand and a clipboard in the other. When she answered, I smiled like a dentist about to deliver bad news. "Hi there," I said. "We're doing a neighborhood tech audit. Found a small device leaking signal interference. It's illegal under both HOA rules and FCC regulations. Know anything about this?" Her face went pale. She stammered something about kids and science project. I handed her a cease and desist letter I'd already prepared and let her know I'd be forwarding the incident to the HOA's ethics committee, also me, and our legal advisor, which was actually just my brother-in-law's friend Ray in a nice suit. The next day, Tina's house went dark too. For a moment, the war seemed over. But then came the envelope. This one was thicker than the rest. It was slid under my door in the middle of the night, no return address. Inside were 10 pages of documents, printouts of my social media, a grainy photo of me at an airport, and a highlighted note questioning my frequent out-of-state travel. There was a cover letter, written in the same prissy tone Karen used on her HOA memos, addressed to whom it may concern, and urging appropriate investigation into Mr. Keene's activities and known associates. It wasn't just another HOA stunt. It was a full-blown, fake intelligence dossier. My hands shook, but not with fear. With excitement. Because I now had proof that Karen had moved from petty harassment to actual impersonation of federal authority. This wasn't HOA business anymore. This was impersonation, defamation, stalking, and potentially a violation of federal code, depending on how many of those documents she'd forged or stolen. I made 3 calls. First, to Ray, who nearly screamed with laughter and told me to sit tight. Second, to my lawyer, who was suddenly very interested in filing for a restraining order. And third, to a friend at the local news station. Because Karen Middleton wanted a war built on paper trails, bureaucratic jargon, and paranoia. Fine. I would give her exactly that. Only my version would include subpoenas, televised interviews, and the slow, grinding wheels of actual justice. It took exactly 48 hours for the first shoe to drop. Karen thought she was untouchable because, for 5 years, she'd never been told no, only indulged, tolerated, or tiptoed around. People feared her paper trail, her tirades, her iron grip on the HOA. But now the system she once weaponized was looking back at her with sharp teeth. On Monday morning, 2 plainclothes investigators showed up at her door. No lights, no sirens, just calm, unmarked authority. I watched from my porch, sipping coffee and pretending to read the paper as they knocked. She opened the door halfway, her face stretched into something resembling a suburban horror mask. They talked. She nodded. Then she tried to close the door, but one of the agents, a tall guy with the patience of a metronome, stuck out his foot. They were inside for 30 minutes. When they left, they didn't look satisfied. Karen stood in the doorway clutching a folder like it was a flotation device. She saw me watching and quickly retreated inside. I didn't wave this time. I didn't need to. Her windows were dark for 2 days straight. The news story dropped on Wednesday. The local CBS affiliate ran it first. Fake intel report targets community president, authorities investigating possible impersonation of federal officer. I wasn't named. Karen wasn't either. But the details were unmistakable to anyone in Willow Creek. The screenshots, the interview with the police department, the blurred image of the fake dossier, all of it sent our little HOA into a full-scale gossip meltdown. Someone even started a neighborhood group chat called HOA No She Didn't. I didn't join, but I received enough forwarded texts to know exactly what was being said. Some were shocked. Others were thrilled. Tina deactivated all her social account. And Harold, bless him, dropped off a lemon pound cake with a note that read, "We owe you one." Karen finally resurfaced on Friday, wearing sunglasses big enough to block both shame and UV rays. She strutted down the sidewalk like she still owned it, even though half the neighborhood refused to make eye contact. She passed by me with her jaw set, her mouth tight, not saying a word. That should have been the end of it. But then she did something so wildly audacious, so absurdly entitled, that I actually burst out laughing when I saw the document. She was suing me. Not just a regular civil suit. She filed a harassment and defamation claim in small claims court, alleging I had weaponized public opinion against her, slandered her name through manipulative tactics, and orchestrated a psychological campaign of humiliation. She even tried to claim I leaked the news story personally, ignoring the fact that the reporter had footage of her placing the fake dossier in my mailbox. I guess facts were optional now. Her lawsuit was riddled with typos, printed on pink paper, and filed pro se. But that didn't mean it couldn't make a mess. I showed the documents to my lawyer, and he nearly choked on his sandwich. She cited emotional terrorism, he said, wiping his mouth. That's not even a legal term. Still, we filed a formal response, just to be thorough. And because I knew Karen's next move wouldn't be legal, it would be public. Sure enough, she started canvassing. She went door to door, dragging behind her a little wheeled suitcase full of pamphlets and printouts. I saw her ring doorbells, gesture wildly, hand over her little propaganda packets like she was running a campaign for Queen of the cul-de-sac. Some people closed their doors. Others accepted out of sheer politeness. One guy took the pamphlet, ripped it in half, and dropped it in her suitcase while smiling. Karen did not take it well. I finally got my own copy when I came home late from work one night and found a manila envelope stuck to my front door with painter's tape. Inside was a 6-page community alert entitled, "The Truth About Mr. Keene." It featured grainy surveillance photos of me mowing my lawn, scandalous, a list of my known associates, my sister, my friend Eddie, and my godson, and a dramatic flowchart connecting me to federal agencies of concern. It was formatted like a true crime PowerPoint and watermarked with her initials. I showed it to Ray, who asked if he could keep a copy for Training Day comic relief. But here's where it went from ridiculous to dangerous. The next morning, my godson's parents got a call from Child Protective Services. An anonymous tipster claimed their son had been seen in an environment laced with covert surveillance equipment and unregistered personnel. The agent on the line, to their credit, realized pretty quickly that it was nonsense. They followed up with a standard wellness visit, apologized profusely, and closed the file within a day. But the damage was done. Karen had dragged a kid into this, and that was my line. I filed for a restraining order. The court date was set 2 weeks out, but in the meantime, I made sure every shred of her behavior, every false claim, every unsolicited pamphlet, every contact attempt, was documented, time-stamped, and indexed. I built a binder so comprehensive it could have been submitted to the Library of Congress. My lawyer reviewed it and just nodded. "Let's bury her in her own words," he said. Then something unexpected happened. People started coming to me, not with complaints but with offers. Turns out I wasn't the only one Karen had harassed over the years. One guy showed me an invoice Karen had sent him for illegal wind patterns, caused by his new ceiling fan. Another neighbor revealed she'd once been fined for aggressive holiday inflatables. Someone else confessed they'd paid a monthly emergency landscaping surcharge just to keep Karen from nitpicking their flower bed. We collected statements, emails, recordings. People who'd been too scared to speak up were now lining up to testify. And then I got the email. It was from a woman named Jeanette, a former board secretary who'd resigned abruptly 2 years prior. She had a PDF of internal HOA memos, real ones, showing that Karen had once tried to classify certain cultural events as non-conforming gatherings to block what she called foreign music contamination. When the board refused, Karen edited the meeting minutes before publishing them. Jeanette had kept the originals. She sent them to me with a simple message: "Use them well." I did. At the restraining order hearing, Karen wore all black like she was attending a funeral for her dignity. I wore a navy blazer and smiled politely as the judge reviewed the packet we submitted. My lawyer opened with a dry, brilliant takedown that walked the court through Karen's timeline of escalating behavior. He highlighted the fake FBI memo, the bogus lawsuit, the defamatory flyers, and the CPS call. He called each move deliberate, reckless, and fueled by a hunger for control. Karen tried to interject. The judge shut her down. Then came the witnesses. One by one, neighbors stepped forward to describe her long pattern of harassment. The wind fines, The chalk complaints. The time she tried to classify a barbecue as a hostile encampment because someone brought cornhole board. By the time Jeanette handed over her flash drive to the bailiff, Karen looked like she might physically evaporate. The restraining order was granted on the spot. 3 years. No contact. No HOA participation. No flyers, no emails, not even a whisper in my direction. Karen thought she'd hit rock bottom when the judge read her the terms of the restraining order. She was wrong. Rock bottom came 2 weeks later, when she received a summons for civil court and saw that I wasn't just suing her, I was doing it with the full backing of half the neighborhood. I'd listed every incident, every fake report, every abuse of HOA power, every documented attempt to smear my name, damage my reputation, and weaponize federal institutions for her personal vendetta. And this time, she wouldn't be hiding behind HOA bylaws or anonymously filed complaints. This time, she'd be answering for everything, under oath, in public. The lawsuit wasn't about money. I didn't care about squeezing a few thousand out of her retirement fund. It was about establishing a precedent, a warning, a clear, judicially documented statement that what she had done was not quirky neighborhood politics, it was malicious, systemic harassment. And I wanted every future HOA president, Karen in training, or clipboard-wielding tyrant to know that there were consequences for crossing that line. The moment the suit became public record, everything changed. Karen's few remaining allies, mostly the folks who still thought recycling bins on non-collection days were a mortal sin, began distancing themselves fast. Tina sold her house. Harold asked to retire permanently from all board duties and offered me a bottle of scotch he'd been saving since 2004. I accepted. Karen, however, responded in the only way she knew how. She filed a countersuit. She claimed I had engaged in character assassination, that my position on the HOA board gave me unlawful influence over public opinion, and that I had coerced neighbors into testifying against her. She even accused me of orchestrating a neighborhood-wide conspiracy to erode her mental health. The irony, of course, was that every accusation was a mirror image of what she had actually done. Projection meet paperwork. My lawyer, a patient and dryly hilarious man named Derek, read the countersuit once and said, "This is less of a defense and more of a diary entry." The judge agreed. Karen's countersuit was thrown out at the pretrial hearing for being frivolous and retaliatory. We were greenlit to proceed, and trial was set for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, discovery began, and that's when things got really interesting. Because in the process of digging through Karen's digital footprint, my lawyer uncovered something unexpected. Multiple emails, dozens in fact, sent from Karen's personal account to an external contractor. A private investigator, one she had hired, with HOA discretionary funds, to monitor ongoing threats to community standards. She'd used HOA money, our dues, to pay for surveillance. Not just of me, but of several residents she deemed potentially destabilizing. Eddie was on the list. So was Jeanette. Even the guy with the wind chimes. Derek was giddy. "This," he said, "is what we call the jackpot. Because this wasn't just personal harassment anymore. This was embezzlement, misappropriation of funds, unauthorized surveillance, wire fraud, depending on how the PI handled billing." We handed the discovery over to the county's district attorney, who quietly opened a separate investigation. I didn't even have to push. Karen had done all the work for us, typed it up, sent it, signed it, and billed it to the HOA under the expense label Security Initiatives. When word got out, it detonated like a bomb. A group of residents filed a class action complaint. A few folks called for the HOA to dissolve entirely. A local journalist did a follow-up piece entitled, "The Spy Next Door: How an HOA President Built Her Own Suburban Surveillance State." The photo was of Karen's front door, with a quote underneath, "I just wanted a quiet neighborhood." Meanwhile, Karen went silent. Completely silent. She stopped answering her phone. Her mailbox overflowed. Her blinds stayed closed. I half expected her to skip the trial, to vanish and leave the court to clean up the mess. But then the morning of the hearing arrived, and there she was, standing outside the courthouse in a gray pantsuit, hair tightly pulled back, jaw clenched like she'd been carved from tension itself. Court was held in a modest chamber with a low ceiling and flickering fluorescent lights. But to me, it felt like the stage for a grand finale. I didn't take the stand right away. First came the testimony. Jeanette detailed the doctored meeting minute. Eddie presented a slideshow of the surveillance devices Karen had installed and the frequency scans he'd run to prove their origins. My godson's parents described the trauma of a CPS visit sparked by a malicious lie. And then came me. I walked the court through everything. From the first complaint about patio chairs to the forged dossier to the restraining order to the private investigator. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just laid it all out, calm, clear, surgical. My lawyer handed the judge our binder of evidence. Karen's attorney objected to half of it, lost every objection, and eventually stopped trying. Then the judge turned to Karen and asked if she had anything to say in her defense. She stood, slowly. Her voice shook at first, then steadied as she began the monologue she had clearly rehearsed 100 times in her head. She said she only ever wanted to protect the neighborhood, that she felt abandoned by the board, that her actions, while perhaps excessive, were driven by a sincere concern for order. She blamed unfair media coverage for distorting her intentions. She even threw in a reference to her late cat, Misty, who she claimed would have supported her mission. It was almost impressive, the level of delusion, but the judge was unmoved. In the end, the verdict was swift and brutal. The court found Karen guilty of targeted harassment, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and misuse of funds. She was ordered to pay damages to me and to each neighbor involved in the class action portion. The amount wasn't life-ruining, around $70,000 total, but it was enough to force her to sell her house and liquidate her retirement savings. And then, just when she thought it couldn't get worse, the DA filed criminal charges. That part was out of my hands. I watched it unfold like everyone else. Karen was arrested quietly without fanfare. No cameras, no mugshot splash. Just a quiet trip in the back of a police cruiser one early morning as the sun was rising behind the mountains. The charges: misuse of HOA funds, illegal surveillance, and obstruction of a child welfare investigation. She posted bail, of course, but the damage was done. The last time I saw her was through a courtroom window, across the hallway from a bail hearing. She didn't look angry. She didn't even look scared. She just looked tired, like a balloon that had been inflated far too long and finally deflated in one sad hiss. Back in Willow Creek, the neighborhood was changing. People started planting flowers without fear of citations. Kids rode their bikes across Karen's old driveway. Someone painted a mural on the side of the rec center, a giant, colorful depiction of the words community, not control. It wasn't deep, but it felt good. It felt like healing. As for me, I stepped down as HOA president a month later. I'd done what I came to do. Restored order. Dismantled the weapon. And reminded a small, leafy suburban neighborhood that no one, not even Karen, gets to rule with fear forever. 3 weeks after Claudia packed up and vanished into whatever retirement bunker the Middleton sisters retreated to in times of strategic defeat, peace returned. Not the kind of peace built on submission or silence, but the real kind, the kind you feel when you no longer check your mailbox with dread or scan neighborhood emails like you're disarming a bomb. The street was alive again, in the best possible way. Dogs barked without being weaponized into policy debate. Kids ran unsupervised without being labeled insurgent. One family even painted their fence blue, ocean blue. Karen would have had a cardiac event. We called it progress. But the thing about peace is that it can feel strange when you've spent so long in battle mode. For months, my mornings had been filled with passive-aggressive emails, legal paperwork, strategy calls, and stress-fueled coffee. Now I had none of that. Just long walks, a mailbox full of coupons instead of complaints, and neighbors waving without suspicion. For the first time in ages, I wasn't defending myself. I was just living. That lasted about 4 days. Then came the invitation. It arrived by courier, yes, really, a guy in a blazer with a clipboard who looked more confused than official. The envelope was thick, embossed, and cream-colored. Inside was a letter printed on formal stationery from a law firm in D.C. It wasn't a threat, though I initially braced for one. It was a request. A private think tank specializing in civic policy and community governance had taken interest in the Willow Creek events and wanted me to speak at their annual summit. The topic: localized power abuse in residential communities. I reread it 3 times to make sure it wasn't satire. Apparently, my little neighborhood skirmish had gone viral. A law professor had cited the case in a lecture. A homeowners' rights group shared the news story on their newsletter, and a podcast called Suburban Showdown ran a 3-part series on the Karen who cried FBI. I'd somehow become the poster child for organized resistance against HOA tyranny. And now they wanted me to talk about it. Part of me wanted to say no. I wasn't a speaker. I wasn't an activist. I was just a guy who wanted to throw a birthday party without submitting blueprints. But another part of me, the part that remembered Karen's clipboard, the phony dossier, the CPS visit, knew that silence helped people like her thrive. If there was even a sliver of a chance I could help someone else shut down a petty tyrant with a print budget and a god complex, then fine. I'd talk. So I went. The summit was held in a downtown hotel where the carpeting cost more than my car. There were panels with titles like Property and Precedent, The Fine Line Between Rule and Ruin and HOAs, Harmless or Hostile? I sat on a panel with a guy who once sued his HOA for stealing his Christmas decorations, and another who caught his board using security cameras to fine people for wearing pajamas outside. Compared to them, I was the reasonable one. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it short. I told the story plainly, without flourish. From the folding chairs to the FBI letter to the restraining order to Claudia's attempted comeback. I didn't rant. I didn't gloat. I just walked them through the facts, the absurdity, and the fallout. When I finished, the room was quiet for a second, then erupted into applause that felt real. Not because I was inspiring, but because I had survived something people recognized. Something that happens more than we care to admit: entitlement hiding behind rules, power weaponized by the bored and insecure. Afterward, people lined up to talk to me. A woman from Arizona, whose HOA president banned yard signs but posted political ones himself. A guy from Florida, whose HOA declared his car a visual nuisance because it had a dented fender. A retired vet from Texas, whose American flag was ruled too large. All of them had their own Karens, their own wars, and none of them were laughing. That night, in my hotel room, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I kept thinking about how a suburban nightmare turned into a national cautionary tale, and how many people still thought it couldn't happen to them. When I got home, I expected things to be quiet again. And they were, mostly. Claudia's house was finally sold to a lovely pair of artists who hosted a backyard jazz night the following weekend. Karen's former home sat empty longer. No one wanted to touch it. Not after what they'd read online. Eventually, it was bought by a local nonprofit and converted into a temporary community space. They repainted the door yellow. One afternoon, I sat with Eddie on his porch drinking iced tea, watching a couple of kids chase a frisbee through yards that once had invisible fences of fear. He nudged me with his elbow. "You ever think you'd become famous for beating a Karen at her own game?" I shook my head. If you'd told me a year ago I'd file a restraining order, sue for damages, and speak at a policy summit because someone didn't like my folding chairs, I would have laughed. He smiled. "Well, you weaponized logic." She didn't stand a chance. We clinked glasses. It felt final. Like the end of a chapter, Or maybe the closing credits on a low-budget sitcom that accidentally became a hit. A few weeks later, the new HOA elections rolled around. I didn't run. I didn't have to. A young mom named Grace took over. Smart, level-headed, and allergic to nonsense. Her first motion? An amendment officially banning the use of HOA funds for anything resembling surveillance. Passed unanimously. Her second motion? Replacing the annual community awards ceremony with a casual barbecue and open mic. Also passed. I was asked to perform something, but politely declined. Instead, I stood off to the side with my godson, now older, taller, and still obsessed with cake. He asked if there would be another party like the one we'd thrown last year. I told him, only if we can get the FBI involved again. He laughed, not entirely sure I was joking. And as dusk settled over Willow Creek, lights twinkled on, music drifted from Bluetooth speakers, and the air was filled with something I hadn't heard in a long time. Laughter. Not nervous or forced. Just real. I took it in for a moment. The chairs, the food, the people, not policed, not regulated. Just neighbors being neighbors. The thing Karen never understood was that community isn't about control. It's about connection. And no amount of bylaws or clipboard crusades can manufacture that. Before I left that night, someone handed me a manila envelope. I tensed for a split second, trauma response, I guess, but it wasn't another complaint. It was a thank you card, signed by most of the neighborhood, with a photo of the barbecue taped inside and one simple sentence written underneath. For the guy who brought the rules back to reality. I smiled. Then I folded the card, slipped it into my pocket, and finally, let go of the last piece of the war. Because the battle was over. And we had won.